I have a confession to make. I did not finish watching this season of Euphoria. I had to stop after episode three, just became too hard to watch with so many of the characters in a place of disempowerment and what felt like restricted sovereignty. I'm sure this is by design. At the beginning of the first episode, we have this visual of a bunch of birds in cages, which almost feels like the various main characters throughout, this season. And so it kind of sets that stage like visually for that theme as well. But it just felt like too much for me personally, and especially also having all of the women, maybe not all of the women, like all of the women except for Lexi, involved in sex work in some form or another. Obviously, we have Cassie's OnlyFans. We have the woman at the Silver Slipper, is what it's called, and Jules, who is in a sugar baby position and is literally wrapped up in cling wrap to the point where she can't move by a man who is controlling her finances and her home situation. And then on the other side of that, we have Maddy, who is profiting off of the OnlyFans sex work in that sphere, but is also kind of making slut shaming comments at the beginning. And then we have Rue, who is in a managerial position at the strip club and is kind of profiting off the sexualization in that way, but she's also a victim of human trafficking. And so that's like very layered. It just feels like this idea that women's presence and bodies can be bought permeates throughout most of the female characters this season, even like in between Rue and Jules, like early on in their rekindling reconnection, Rue invites her to the wedding and Jules is like, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that. I don't remember what exactly she says, but she, expresses her concerns and her feelings of feeling conflicted about whether or not she wants to go. And then Rue's like, well, I'm gonna pay you, so you're gonna come and be my date. So Rue just kind of like ignores Jules's concerns and feelings and hesitation in that moment, and their relationship, like that moment, it becomes transactional, like, and that's between two of the female characters who were like friends, close friends and like lovers, and it becomes transactional in this way of like your presence and body can be bought. And part of that is probably because she's trying to appeal to Jules in a way that she's seeing Jules interact with the world, but it brings that essence to their own dynamic. And same with Cassie and Maddy, though they have a very complicated relationship from what happens in season two and how it ends. But still, Maddy is now profiting off of Cassie. And so it brings that element into their dynamic as well. So it just feels like this buying presence and bodies things with women just permeates throughout. And it was hard for me to watch. I kept thinking it's gonna get better, things are gonna look up, and it just wasn't. And it just felt like I was just continuously putting my nervous system under fire by watching it. And I understand that that's the direction that they chose to take the season in, and that's fine. It just wasn't for me personally. So I started thinking, well, what if these characters had more empowered storylines and we're starting 5 years later from a healthier place? I personally really liked the 5 year time jump and the idea of that. I think it would have been really interesting to have, of course, like the main characters that we know, like 5 years later, out of high school, out of college, if they went to college. But I also would have liked to see like a new cast of high schoolers as well, kind of their stories going parallel to the older, like cast or not cast, sorry, like characters. So like we have obviously like the main characters that we know and their storylines are going in their new adult world. And then we also have some new characters that are in high school, probably at like the same high school, and kind of how their stories are mirroring or interacting or whatever. I think that would have been interesting, especially Rue. I think it would have been really interesting to have Rue as like an mentor type figure like Allie was to her, to another character who's like who's an addict and like in a position that she was in, last we saw her. I think that would have been a really cool kind of dynamic to show. My second confession is that I am recording this on Zoom. I'm not going to use it for the whole video, but I had recorded this on my phone, and my phone's so old now that it did not transfer. It couldn't transfer to my computer for editing. I couldn't airdrop it like I usually do. It wasn't connecting over iCloud. Like, I could not get the dang video from my phone onto my computer. And so I thought about doing like a faceless video, but I haven't done those, and I wanted to like at least show my face. And like, if you're new here, hello, I'm not AI, I promise, but I will for the remainder of the video kind of just show pictures of the characters that I'm talking about because yeah, I know this video quality isn't like the best. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to talk about Kat. I know she wasn't really around this season and she kind of crashed and burned a bit in season two, but I wanted to have her in this season as a main character too. So we're going to talk about her. I think 5 years later, she would be working as a ghostwriter. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, the fanfic Tumblr writer to ghostwriter pipeline. But I think she would be ghostwriting and making a good amount of money from it, but feeling unfulfilled. Season two, it's really interesting the turn her character took in season two and how she was struggling with self-hatred and didn't really feel like she knew who she was. And so I think it makes sense ghostwriting. She's writing for other people, but feeling unfulfilled. And I think her character arc this season would be finding her own voice and confidence and self-assuredness in who she is. And also that in turn bolstering her ability to communicate because, oh my gosh, that breakup with Ethan was brutal and a masterclass in how to be terrible at communicating. So I would like to see also. I would like to, I think it would be interesting to start this season, like season three, during the holidays, even though these characters have gone off to college and maybe started their lives in other cities. Everyone's back in the area of their hometown for the holidays, which gives, the opportunity for people to meet up, to run into each other, to maybe clash and argue or hook up with each other or whatever it is, it gives that kind of opportunity for that. And so I think starting the season during the holidays, during the hometown, the whole season doesn't have to stay there, it can progress past that. But that's kind of the catalyst point of how these characters reconverge at the beginning. And I would like to see Kat and Jules catching up and they decide to move in together and move to the city, move to LA probably. Jules has been in New York City because of course she has, but they decide to move in together and they're both feeling creatively unfulfilled. And so they start making zines. I think it's pronounced zines because it's like short for magazine. But they start making these zines as a way to kind of express themselves also collaboratively. And Kat is doing more of the writing and Jules is doing more of the design element. They start really taking off and going viral and stuff. And Kat and Jules decide to start a magazine together from that. And so I really love this idea for Kat because it's kind of like her character arc is her going from writing for other people to writing for herself. And that's also symbolic of her like finding like her own voice and confidence and self-assuredness in who she is and her ability to communicate. Also, she has to write in this very real vulnerable sense. I mean, we can see her kind of maybe writing some like more personal pieces. And I mean, I can't confirm for sure, but looking at her history, I think Kat struggles with vulnerability because if we look at her past with like her love life when she was hurt by that kid, I think his name was Daniel, for her appearance, they were like boyfriend, girlfriend, and then she went on that vacation, gained a lot of weight, and then she came back and he broke up with her. And so I think she started turning to fiction because it was easier than dealing with the risk of getting hurt in like being vulnerable in a real actual relationship and real intimacy. And so I kind of want to see her moving through that. And also in season two, we get this really fascinating, interesting scene where all these like social media personas pop up around Kat and of like, oh, just like love yourself, love yourself. And she's like freaking out. But with the magazine, she now gets a visible voice in the conversation on women's bodies, their perspectives on their bodies, and women's portrayal in the media. And so I know the magazine's kind of like out of left field, but the more I thought about it, the more I really liked it, especially like all the other characters, like they all kind of tie into this, and this is kind of will be like a core thing that brings them together. But yeah, I really like that for Kat. Also with the going back to the magazine, I know it's very like 2000s girl boss, but I think it also could spark a conversation on digital media consumption and the constant overstimulation and overwhelm of it versus physical media. And I've been seeing a resurgence of people, I don't know if romanticizing is the right word, but like having this desire for physical media and that you can like hold in your hand and wanting to disconnect and take breaks from the overstimulation and overwhelm of our current social media world. And so I don't think it's that far off to like think that, you know, a magazine could take off. And I think they could kind of touch on that subject of the physical media versus the online kind of media world that we're in. In terms of reconnecting with Ethan, I think it would be interesting to like have them at least have an interaction, or she like, you know, sees that he's in town and they like have a run in the grocery store or something. I don't know about them getting back together though, just because that breakup was pretty brutal. Like I don't know if Ethan would want to get back together with her. Obviously, she'd have to do a lot of like apologizing and like there'd have to be like a good amount of repair and showing that she's grown in order for that to move forward in a healthy way. But yeah, I think seeing her unpack her, the way that fan fiction has maybe warped and affected her view of sex and her romantic life, I think would be more like it would be, I feel like it'd be interesting to unpack that in relation to that vulnerability thing that I talked about before. Maybe there's a new love interest and she's having to actively work around some of her stuff and we see her kind of go through that. Let me know what you would have liked to see for Kat and if you think she should get back together with Ethan or not, or if she should have a love interest this season at all. Moving on to Jules. This season, I do not understand how we went from this.
I feel like I've framed my entire womanhood around men when, like, in reality, I'm no longer interested in men, like, philosophically, like, what men want. Like, I look at myself and I'm like, how the fuck did I spend my entire life building this? Like my body and my personality and like my soul around what I think men desire. It's embarrassing.
I do not understand how we went from this to this. Like, Jules in high school was already deconstructing the way that she had formed her self-identity around men through like the male gaze. Like she was already starting to become aware of that and resist that. That I just don't see how like 5 years later she would find herself in a position where she's given up her entire financial freedom and her art dreams because of a man who's married. Like I don't get it. I just want better for her arc, especially like I just like to think that 5 years later, she'd be in a much more empowered place where she wouldn't be so like dependent on men in like multiple ways. So here's what I would want to see for Jules. Obviously, she's going to school, or she went to school. She graduated from school in New York City. She went to like I think there was a fashion school that she wanted to go to. Like season one, she mentioned it was like a fashion school, maybe, or art school. Like she went to a fashion or art school in New York City. She found more queer community there and stepped more, was experimenting more with her style, her sense of identity, and she was, like coming into her own and kind of land on something that feels really good for her. Or maybe she's just, continuously morphing and changing and growing when it comes to aesthetics, which would make sense for her as well. She starts during college working as like a freelance artist graphic designer to help pay the bills. And she also takes on like an internship at a local art museum. And now, after graduation, she's continued to be a freelance artist, graphic designer, and has kind of doubled down on that. And it's kind of become like her full-time thing. She's also now working part-time at the art museum. So the internship turned into a job opportunity, but she's feeling kind of unfulfilled, similarly to Kat, on how she's not really creating art for herself. She's creating art for other people, especially like graphic design. She could be creating like icons and stuff for various tech companies' websites or things like that. Anyway, that's kind of what she's doing. And so when her and Kat meet up and they're both kind of talking about how, yeah, they're making money in this field, but they're not really doing like what they really want to do. And they're feeling kind of like they're not really growing. They feel kind of like they're becoming solidified into these areas in their career, and like they're kind of almost stuck in a rut in their career. And so that's kind of how they decide to start making zines together and move in together. I also think it would be really interesting to bring in AI art as part of like the conversation, because obviously AI art has become a thing in the past few years and the ethics of it are not great. And so I think having AI art be a piece in this and how it affects her, how she feels about it as an artist, and kind of what it looks like to navigate being an artist in this day and age with AI art around. I recently saw, and this is like, real life, not in this imaginary world, but in real life, I saw a post of someone, it was an artist who was working with this company like as a contract artist, and they had a call with her basically saying, "Thank you for the art you've given us so far. Now we're going to use your art to train our AI, so we're firing you. Bye." That wasn't, I guess, verbatim, but I'm sure that's happening a lot where companies are, using artists to train their AI without their consent. And then, like, I don't know, I guess like legal stuff, when you sign documents and stuff can get weird. But even the idea, like, AI art itself was trained off of hundreds of thousands of, I don't even know, maybe millions of art pieces without these artists giving their consent. And it takes up all these like resources, environmentally, water, etc., to create even like the idea of AI art itself, like a machine creating art, like if art is inherently human, like I feel like it could be a very interesting piece to bring into the conversation with this season, with Jules trying to be an artist. So delving into the ethics of AI and AI art and showing her trying to navigate like what it's like to be an artist in this day and age. And so like that, what happened to that artist, like maybe something like that can happen to Jules and how she kind of like deals with it. So, yeah, with the magazine, she obviously becomes co-editor in chief. Both her and Kat are editors in chief, and Jules kind of reigns over the design aspect of it in the fashion section, and perhaps she can also get into doing some modeling as well. also, because of a connection with a different character that comes in, she's able to get connections into launching her own like fashion brand of clothes or accessories or bags that she like designs. And that's, I'll get into that later though, because that connects with Maddy, who we'll talk about now. She is in the fashion industry because looking at season two, how she was, I mean, she's always been very stylish. And the way that she was like trying on all the clothes and reacting to the clothes from the woman that she was house sitting and babysitting for, like, I can just really see her like being a stylist. And so I think at the start of that 5 year jump, she's working now as an assistant for a high-end, well-known stylist. And Maddie's career arc throughout season three is going to be her branching out on her own and becoming like a solo stylist. I think also it would make sense. Like, I could see her being a fashion influencer as well. Like, I can see her posting like outfit of the day videos and like, makeup tutorials and things like that. 2 years before season three, current day, she like starts as like she starts posting stuff. And by the start of season three, she's already like a fairly big fashion influencer. And she helps the magazine by helping their social media presence get started. Also, obviously, if she's been doing the social media stuff for a while, she's quite savvy in it. Also, I see her being social media and marketing savvy just in general. So she helps them with their social media presence and also can help with the fashion section by giving them access to a lot of physical pieces. Like, if she's a stylist, she has access to a lot of like dresses and coats and pants and bags and necklaces and jewelry. Like she has access to these things. So she can like help give them connections and stuff to be able to get, the clothes and fashion stuff that they need. Also, Jules and her reconnect, and Jules, through the connections through Maddy and also the exposure from the magazine, Jules is able to start her own fashion brand. When it comes to Maddy's emotional arc, I would want to see her unpacking the trust issues that likely would have come after one, being in an abusive relationship, and two, having her best friend hooking up with and getting with her abusive ex, and also her feeling like that friendship like wasn't real, at least towards the end, and like the betrayal from her friend. And so I feel like it's likely that she would have trust issues after that, especially with making new friends, maybe with dating. So like I want to see her kind of how that affected her and how she's unpacking it and like moving forward from that. I remember there's a scene where she's talking with the rich woman in the pool, and the rich woman saying how, it seems like she used to be similar to Maddie in that like they both like to fight a lot. And the rich lady says, I'm sorry, I'm calling her rich lady. I just don't know how else to identify her.
And I love to fight.
See, I'm not a mess, but I do love a fight.
Ugh, it's the best.
Totally underrated.
In the long run, not so much, but in the moment,
Fucking amazing.
ugh,
But, I mean, that's just who I am.
yeah. I used to think that's who I was too until I met Sebastian.
You don't fight?
No, really, no.
Really?
Yeah.
I just don't think my brain is wired that way.
If you were still dating guys like this in your 40s, we'd be having a very different conversation, but you're 18 years old. Who gives a shit?
I want to see her growing from that and actively choosing a healthy relationship and healthy love, and like the struggle that that is for her to like come out of that. Looking at her backstory of like her parents and how like her dad was like an alcoholic on the couch all the time, and her mom, like she just saw this complete like lack of passion like between, like her parents just seemed like she didn't want the relationship that her mom and her dad wanted. And so I think she started to conflate this like intensity and unhealthy toxic behavior from Nate as like, well, at least he loves me and he's like passionate about me. And so I want to see her unraveling that and actively choosing people that she feels safe with rather than those that trigger her nervous system and start to feel that difference between is this person actually like, is this actually passionate love or is it just my nervous system being triggered? She would start out single at the beginning of season three, but then by the end up like in a relationship with like a guy that's actually like, it's a healthy relationship. I'd also like to see her obviously heal. I mean, I think she would probably still continue to be really good friends with Kat and the other girls, and I like to see that deepen over this season as she really like builds trust in her friends and relationships again. Because as I said, like what happened to her in season two, like that's got to be a mental mind fuck that just like messes with your trust to at least a certain degree. In terms of a potential makeup with Cassie, I'm not sure. I mean, I do think it could be possible because when she's in the pool with that rich woman, she asks her,
Did you and your friend ever make up?
God, no, she never spoke to me again.
which gives me the sense that at least in that moment she's open to it. Obviously, Cassie would have to like have a lot of character growth and like apologize genuinely, not whatever happened at the pool in actual season three. Cassie, we're going to talk about Cassie soon because oh my gosh, this season. Anyway, but let me know if you think Maddie and Cassie should like actually become friends again. I could see Cassie like genuinely apologizing, them like having some like meaningful conversations, but I don't know if they would go back to like being best friends. I'm not sure. Let me know what you guys think. But yeah, speaking of Cassie, let's transition onto Cassie. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this was a difficult one for me this season. Obviously, I mean, there's the obvious like dog baby fetish stuff that is like, I mean, that's a whole other thing. The OnlyFans, though, isn't what bothers me the most. I think what bothers me the most about Cassie this season was how she seemed to become this like very wealth obsessed, self-obsessed, almost like shell of a person. At least I've only seen the first three episodes. I'm not sure about how she progresses in the later episodes, but season one and season two, Cassie, her character just seems so focused on and driven by being loved. And she didn't seem to be that material obsessed, honestly. Like, if anything, Maddie was always the one who was like more obsessed with material wealth and like things like, like the fur coat and like the nicer, quote unquote, nicer things in life. That didn't seem to be something that was a real driving factor for Cassie. And even though Cassie, especially season two, Cassie had her moral shortcomings, it still showed her as a very like her very torn up about what she was doing and as like a very complicated and complex character, especially in terms of her emotional world. And I feel like this season just kind of threw that to the side and was just like, okay, she's just gonna be this like self-absorbed, I'm just in it for me, getting to the top and getting rich type of person, which I think is a disservice to season one and season two, Cassie. For season three, it would be nice to have it start with her dealing with the repercussions of centering men in her life, because that's kind of where we left off on season two. This season, she starts out, she's in a relationship with someone. It could be Nate, it could be some other guy who's kind of an asshole. It's not a healthy relationship, but she has a man, so she's quote unquote loved in her mind, but she's not loved by herself. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but I think it is a very important like distinction for her character. Like we see season two, she's like, well, she has that like breakdown and she's just like, I've never ever been happier. And she's clearly like miserable. And so I think exploring that dynamic more, especially 5 years later, if she's further down the rabbit hole, and kind of seeing how if she's like changed herself to be this perfect mold of what she and or her partner thinks a woman quote unquote should be, we can see her inner self start to, after a few years of dealing with this, now her inner self starts to push back at this. I especially thinking of Cassie's season one, how she was like hurt by men and like sexually exploited, also with like like they'd film her without her consent and then like distribute it. That's even like the more heartbreaking thing about the OnlyFans storyline. But thinking about that and how at the end of season two, like Lexi and her mom had to hide the knives in the house so she wouldn't hurt herself. She clearly like needed help and like therapy. So I think seeing her still later now, years later, still struggling with that guilt and like self-hatred, her art can be coming back to herself and her power by like decentering male validation and finding like strength and confidence in herself and finding that self-validation. That's kind of what I want to see for her arc. And she can start getting into ice skating again. And maybe she finds more like community, woman community there too. Like I'd like to see her also having genuine attempts at repairing some of the relationships she burned with the woman in her life. Lexi, for one, we start season three and Lexi and Cassie are all chill when at the end of season two, they kind of had that blowout at her. Well, I guess Cassie had a blowout at Lexi at her play. And then she left her mom, like she left the house. It's unclear, like, are her and her mom on good terms? But then season three is just acting as if, like, oh yeah, they're all chill, they're all fine, without getting like any sort of flashback or backstory onto how that was repaired. Maybe it comes in later in the season, but I didn't see it. And also, of course, repairing the relationship with Maddy, or at least attempting to. But yeah, and I think like maybe like halfway through the season or maybe towards the end, she leaves the relationship she has with Nate or another guy, whichever one. I don't know. Do you guys think she should still be with Nate 5 years later? Or like it's just like another guy who's like very similar to Nate, but not Nate? I don't know. But either way, she leaves that relationship and in order to like gain, make money for herself, she like takes a job in retail or working at a restaurant or something like that. And she moves in with roommates or moves back home. But it's kind of that her leaving this world where she's centered men and changed herself for men and that kind of toxic environment to finding self-validation and having healthy relationships with women and others in her life. So Cassie would start out season three in a relationship, end it single, which is the opposite of Maddy, who would start season three single and end up in a relationship. And that dynamic between them is the switch of season two, because in season two, Cassie starts out single and ends up with Nate, whereas Maddy starts the season either with Nate or on an on-off relationship with Nate, but then ends the season fully done with Nate. So I think that's just that would be interesting to have that flipped for season three. Next up, we have Lexi. I like the idea of her like working at a studio. It's kind of hinted at least from what I've seen in season three, that she's on the edge of burnout. Like she's working on these long hours and she's just like work has become her life. So I'd like to see season three delve into that more and kind of explore that burnout lifestyle of what she's doing. And maybe at some point she just like cracks and has like a full-on like kind of meltdown. She kind of snaps in her own way. Obviously it'd be different from the way that Cassie snaps, but I think she quits her job and then she starts working on her own script and she finds a writing agent and starts working on her own script. There's obviously like a pattern here for a lot of like the creatives where it's like they leave working for other people and start on their own stuff. I think just seeing how like disempowered they were in actual season three and I wanted to like overcorrect. But I don't know. I want to see them have happy endings, even if that's not the Euphoria way. It's what I want for them. But yeah, and she can also like work part-time at the magazine or like help them out with like writing articles. And that can also help with having some income while she's working on her own script. But yeah, I also obviously like everything with Fez, like we ended season two with like she was starting to have feelings for Fez and he was going to come to her play and then he didn't for obvious reasons. And so I think exploring that, and maybe this is explored in later in season three, but I'd like to see kind of like the maybe like guilt and anxiety that she feels when she tries to date new people and how she kind of navigates that. And maybe like part of her breakdown can also be from grief from the Fez situation. And in that moment, like I want to see Rue comforting her when she breaks down because in high school, obviously we see like Rue is kind of this loose cannon and Lexi's the one who has her shit together. Whereas I like to see kind of Rue being the one who's like there for her and like a rock for her when Lexi's like having a breakdown. So yeah. What would you guys like to see for Lexi's love life in season three? I'm not sure. I don't know if like it would be better to just center her character arc on like her, leaving like this burnout situation and then like for like standing up for herself and setting more boundaries and that kind of being like her main arc, or if we also want to like also throw in a love interest in there. I don't know. Let me know what you guys would have liked to see for Lexi. Okay, moving on to Rue. Um so this was a difficult one because obviously she owes Lori a bunch of money, and that's hard to work around. As I said like earlier, I would have loved to see her kind of take on an Allie type role for another young person in high school who's going through similar issues that she had. But in terms of like where she's at when we see her, one option that I was thinking of is that shortly after season two ends, she goes to jail for like 5 years. And season three starts with Rue getting out of jail or like recently released from like prison or jail, prison, jail. I don't know. Do people go to jail for 5 years? I don't know. Anyway, she's been incarcerated and she has spent, whereas the other characters have spent these last 5 years going to college, getting set up in their careers, navigating life in young adulthood, out in the world. She's been doing that in incarceration, in prison, in jail. And so it can kind of be how everyone has grown and changed, but she hasn't been out in the world since like shortly after high school. And so I think her character arc can focus on that adjustment and also how prison might have like changed and shaped her. And she's obviously going to be sober coming out of jail because she wouldn't have had access to drugs. She would have detoxed in there. So also seeing her struggle with staying sober once she's coming back out into the world and wanting to be sober and kind of having to resist temptation. Also, in terms of the Lori situation, I was thinking like when she was in prison, she would have told the feds about Lori, and they would have within those 5 years incarcerated her. So the payment would no longer be an issue because Lori would be in prison for much longer than Rue was. So I'm not sure if that's a cop out of the situation though, but I that's kind of how I was thinking to deal with it. Other options could be that she does start season through three in a very similar situation with Lori that she does in actual season three, and she's able to get out of it by like one option could be with the magazine, they end up making enough money to pay Rue out. Or another option is that with help from her friends, they call the human trafficking hotline, which I'm gonna share later on. I'm also going to have it linked in the description, but there is like an actual hotline that you can call if either you or someone you know or love is in like a human trafficking situation, you can call them for help. And so that can also be a way where like with their help, she's able to figure a way out of it. in terms of the magazine because it all comes back to the magazine. I think she can help the magazine by being like a whatever needs to get done stuff, like helping behind the scenes, running errands, helping Maddie with camera setup and stuff for socials and like filming. She can also like distribute physical copies of the magazine. And like when the zines are, when Jules and Kat are first doing the zines, like Rue is helping to like print them and like distribute them. I also would want to see her at least trying to repair her relationships with her mom and with Gia. In terms of how well that goes, I'm not sure, but I would like to see that happen. And so far, I hadn't seen that happening in actual season three. Also, part of her art could be like showing the adjustment that it is for people coming out of prison, especially for Rue as someone who had never really navigated the world as an adult, like what that transition is like for her. Maybe she could move in back in with her mom during that time and we can see them reconcile. Also, I'm not sure if Rue and Jules should get back together. Let me know what you guys think about that. That's obviously like a convoluted relationship, but let me know if you would have liked to see them get back together in a way that's actually healthy or because like what I was seeing at the beginning of season three as I said, it felt like Rue was making it transactional, which felt like it wasn't going in a great direction. But yeah, let me know what you would have liked to see for Rue and Jules's relationship, or at least their dynamic together for season three. So that's it for the characters. And because actual season three deals with human trafficking, I'm going to share this 24-hour national human trafficking hotline. Also, I looked up some from some websites like the National Human Trafficking Hotline website, and also some other like nonprofits and stuff that work in the helping human trafficking victims industry. I don't think I phrased it well, but I looked up, resources online about how traffickers target at-risk people, who they target, and some warning signs to look for. So, traffickers target at-risk people through sometimes fake employment opportunities, posing as a potential love interest, sometimes offering the possibility of marriage, especially if the person's trying to escape like an abusive home environment. Also, sometimes they can pose as an agent for a modeling company. That's something that I wasn't aware of that I found out in some of my research. And these are some quotes that I'm reading from some of the websites that I found. But it says they target vulnerable people by preying on their personal situations, often targeting people who are going through a difficult time or who lack strong support systems. And they groom their victims online by offering the promise of a better life. They may promise the chance for a quote unquote better life for someone fleeing from an abusive home. They may be promising a lucrative job that's abroad for someone who's maybe struggling to provide for themselves or their family. These are some of the examples that the website gave. I also was looking for signs that someone is like in your vicinity or area could be a human trafficking victim. There's this quote from the National Human Trafficking Hotline website that says, everyone can help by learning the types of trafficking and paying attention to the people around us. So, types of human trafficking include like human trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, organ trafficking, but like paying attention to the people around us, like especially those like in the restaurant industry or hospitality industry, like those who work at hotels and whatnot. So, these are some warning signs or like red flags. One is controlled behavior. So if the suspected victim is like not allowed to speak for themselves, someone else insists on speaking for them or like ordering for them if they're at a restaurant and escorts them everywhere, like the suspected victim is like never allowed to like be on their own. The suspected victim has signs of abuse, so the person appears fearful, submissive, bruised, or malnourished. There's weird adult minor activities. So, like, there's this adult and they're with a minor, and there's maybe some other warning signs or red flags or something feels off. A third party person could be monitoring the entrance or like doors of the place. Someone being dropped off for 30 minutes to an hour and then leaving. Also, someone handling someone else's ID, passport, documents, money, etc. So often traffickers will hold on to their victims' documents and ID and money for them. The victims won't have access to that themselves. So if you suspect that someone is in a human trafficking situation, you can call that hotline or local law enforcement. I just wanted to share those resources so that we can all be a bit more aware of what it could look like. So if we happen to see a situation that is, has a lot of those warning signs that I mentioned, we can maybe call local law enforcement or the hotline and hopefully maybe help that victim. Also, if someone starts messaging you online and seems like a shady situation, always trust your gut. Also, if you suspect that you or a loved one could be in a human trafficking situation, definitely call that hotline. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. If you're still here, I appreciate you listening through to the end. So, yeah, let me know what you thought of season three, what you liked, and what you would have liked to see for the characters and their storylines.